Tonight's class, we reviewed what we've been doing for the past 2 weeks and had some nice participation, nice sharing on people applying the methods. That was so strengthening. It really does work. People do it. You too. And then we managed to zip through an entire psalm, reviewing what we had learned a long time ago from chapter 121 and learning and concluding the entire psalm, and a bit on the laws of Sabbath as well. Hope you enjoy. All right. So I wanted to start this week by sort of briefly recapping last week and the week before. In essence, we had 2 classes on the idea of really trying to utilize the energy of these days, which is the days of Sphira counting. We said that when the Jews left Egypt 3,300 plus years ago, they were on a very, very, very low spiritual level. I mean, that means us, because we were then. That was us in a previous incarnation. And we worked really hard on ourselves. And we really grew from being abysmally low to unbelievably high in these 49 days from the second night of Passover until the holiday of Shavuot, which is impending less than 2 weeks away, 2 weeks from Sunday. 2 weeks minus 2 days. So we really, really use these days to grow, to change. And since then, historically, it's a time of growth and change, which doesn't mean you can't change in July. And please do. It just means this is a good time to make it happen. So we reviewed 8 ideas that were sort of overlapping, very just practical perspectives on how we can change. So I want to review them and then ask if anybody did any work with them. We spoke about the idea of if we get often these days we think of as improving our own character traits, which often they're not always becomes interpersonal dealings. So if it's interpersonal and you're dealing with another Jew, to really focus that other Jew is a piece of God, is a piece of God's essence and being, and to filter whatever they're doing through that perspective. And also, and this is true for anything that you do to change, you're a piece of God. You're a piece of God's essence and being. And as such, you are much more powerful than you give yourself credit, much more powerful than you imagine. You are using probably a tiny, tiny percentage of your muscles, of your spiritual powers. And as such, you really, really do have a lot of power to change. If you set your mind to it, you set your heart to it, you set your will to it, you're huge. You're very powerful. We spoke about the idea of understanding how addictive some of these negative traits are and really defining them as such to almost like, I don't know if I would say be disgusted by them, really realize you have to change. You cannot stay in this addictive state any longer. Because in general, of course, as we said, there's a concept of an awareness of the illness and then a belief in the cure. So sometimes we're not even aware that this is a illness, that this is a problem. Like, whatever, I'm just like this or whatever. You don't always think of it as like, no, this is a real problem. And we want to really recognize the problem and then really believe we can change. The third point we said was recognizing how harmful these traits are to you. You said, like, for example, very often these negative qualities create stress for you and how harmful that is and how destructive that is for yourself. We also spoke, the fourth idea we discussed was, whenever possible, changing the environment, that we can have triggers, difficulties, toxins in our environment that even if we were really had our halo on very firmly, it'd be very difficult, let alone if we don't. So really to see if we can change the environment and remove things that we know are damaging to our growth. We also spoke, of course, Faggy brought in then, I thought it was very powerful, the idea, but if you can't remove them, just really accept that sometimes God, in his kindness and compassion, puts difficult people into your path. They could be, like Faggy was saying, for your atonement, to wash away any negative residual sins. It could also be really the catalyst for you to work hard and grow yourself. Like, if I didn't have this person triggering me, I might not realize how base my responses still are. but now that I do, I can work on them. The fifth idea we spoke about was the mask. Wearing a mask of the person, of the trait you would like to attain. That sometimes it's not us, but we act as if. And acting as if is very, very, very powerful. I can vouch for that. I have done it in the past with traits that I never really thought would change, and they really did when I just acted as if. And we spoke about trying to go deeper, meaning sometimes when we look at it, like let's say we're looking at patience. So we could say, oh, in this situation, I am impatient. I am going to be patient, but then there's more deeply trying to change your whole persona. Understanding that whatever trait you're working on, there's the surface reality of the trait. There's you when you're angry, you when you're judgmental, you when you're self-centered, but then there's the deeper inner self that also is very much impacted by this, and really trying to change on the inside. Change within your whole as a way of life. Like we said, as you're thinking of your long-term goals, it should be filtered through these changes. As you're looking in the details of your life and how you live, you could say, oh, I never really realized, but because I'm impatient, it's not only I get impatient and lose it with my kids. It could also be I don't have the patience for boring, mundane tasks, and that's why I'm always jumping to social media to distract myself. So I might not view that as like, oh my gosh, I'm losing it, but it's an expression of that same trait. So we want to change on the outside as we interact and lose it. And we also want to work on the inside on those ways this manifests itself throughout our life. Then we spoke a lot about the idea of really affirmations, really catching ourselves when we're good, and really giving ourselves the message of the person we want to be. Oh, you behave this way because you have a lot of self-control. I behave this way because I have a lot of self-control. I behave this way because I'm a mensch. I behave this way because I'm strong. I behave this way because I have self-discipline. To constantly give yourself those messages, because we will live up to the messages we tell ourselves about ourselves in either direction. And most often, of course, the nature of the human is to tell ourselves, I can't, and I won't, and I didn't, and I'm a loser, and a failure, and a washout. And we rarely tell ourselves, I'm strong, I'm confident, I'm self-disciplined, I have self-control. And those are the messages we need to hear, because let's convince ourselves that way, not the other way. And the last idea we spoke about, which was really a continuation of the idea of the mask and the man, but it was a little more focused in terms of finding actions that a person like this would do, a person who's patient would, a person who's kind would, a person who's tolerant would, a person who's non-judgmental would, a person who's centered would, and then do them. And those very specific actions we're committing to, ideally on a daily basis, really will create that change. And again, sometimes it's almost like, I don't want to say scary, but it's almost like unbelievable sometimes how quickly we change. And it's like, wow, I could have changed that way so quickly. Well, why was I stuck like this for 50, 60 years? And of course, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it takes longer. But actions of a certain character really on the inside help us achieve that character. So that was a very brief rendition of 2 classes. And the reason I reviewed it is because I said at the end of last week that I wanted to hear the work you were doing. And I really wanted people to use this in the practical, not in the nice theory, but in the practical of their lives. So who has what to report on the great work they've been doing this week?
I can start.
Great, Menucha, let's hear.
Yeah, I had a great opportunity to practice.
You said you weren't going to fetch.
At work, yeah. Working like 12 hours a day, being sleep deprived last week. So I had to practice to bring the energy from inside when I talk to people at work, especially when I'm meeting new clients and new families. I cannot show that I have no energy and I'm falling asleep. So I've been practicing to bring this energy and like charge myself and to be energized and happy and to put the smile on my face. So wearing a mask that we were talking about last week, plus to talking to myself in the end of the day, that could be like telling myself it could be much worse than it was today, could be much worse. And another
24-hour shift, not a 12-hour shift.
And another tool that helped, that I'm learning a lot from these challenges, learning a lot. So that's
you're learning a lot about yourself, or you're learning a lot in general?
Like in general, and at work, because of these challenges.
So you can put it in perspective and say, oh, it's really not bad. It's actually good. I mean, not exactly how I'd want it, but guess what? This is how God wants it. And it's probably all for my tremendous growth. And I'm so grateful. It's so good. It's beautiful. And you didn't complain. So
sometimes to my children. A little.
Just a bit. That's wonderful. That really sounds like tremendous practical application. And over the week, as you did that, did you find it getting a little bit easier to wear that mask? Did it feel a little more natural? I mean, a week is a short amount of time, but.
Yes, especially if I catch myself that I'm like, I have no energy and I'm about to meet a potential client, like I have to get it from inside and bring it out and show that I have some energy.
Absolutely.
I can do it.
Absolutely. I'm many times before I walk into a classroom, I can remember very vividly, like standing outside the door and saying, okay, for the next 45 minutes, I just have to be on. You know, as we were saying, the mask firmly in place. I would think of it just being the actress, alive, happy, vibrant, energized, charismatic for 45 minutes. As soon as it's over, I could just go back to slumping and being exhausted and drained in myself. But, you know, it's not fair for my students for me to, you know, be exhausted and drained when I'm supposed to be teaching them. So I got to wear the mask. I got to be the actress. And as I always found, as I acted vivacious and alive and energized and happy, it became more and more natural. You know, it just somehow really works. It really works. I'm glad you experienced it. So that was an amazing Nachas report. Thank you. That was great. Getting an ovation. Anyone else? Who else would like to report on their week? If Menucha's report sounded too good and that's why you don't want to say yours, don't be intimidated. It's okay. Each one of us has different challenges and different things we're working on.
I didn't practice it this week because I listened to your class only this morning. I'm sorry.
I'm glad you listened.
Yeah, but I understand that something like that was going on before. Like sometimes I know I'm getting into a situation where I can be irritated. So before I get into the whatever, somebody's house or whatever, I prepare myself. Okay, this time I'm going to be just nice, not paying attention to things that usually irritate me. And every time it's like easier.
Exactly. That's exactly the idea.
And in this class, when I heard about mask, I was like, yeah, this is exactly what I was doing. I was putting on the mask, like, it doesn't bother me.
So you were doing it, and now you got the words to describe what you were doing. We could have used Rachel as a model, but we didn't know, and she was busy last week. But yes, when you walk into a place that you know is going to be annoying or could make you feel uncomfortable, intimidated, awkward, you just say, I'm just going to wear the mask, and I'm so serene and gracious, and I don't even notice it. They're saying things that are supposed to be provocative and insulting, and I don't even notice it. I'm just like so regally serene, and yeah, it works, and that's great. And I'm glad you accustomed yourself to do that, because it works.
In similar situations, different feelings, I just started thinking about that today. I'm like, I noticed that some things became natural. Okay, now if I decided that I don't want to get angry often, so I'm like, at the time when I'm almost ready to be angry, no, I'm not going to be, nothing happened. Yeah, and you get used to it, and it's kind of, then you don't even think much about it.
That's exactly the idea. So what Rachel's saying is, it's not only she wears the mask and other people don't realize that they're getting to her, but they're really not getting to her. And then if she wears the mask often enough, it sounds like she's had a number of experiences. If she wears it often enough, she actually sees on the inside the change, that it really doesn't get to her. Then on the inside, she shifted, and things that used to bother her and make her feel intimidated or uncomfortable or awkward or angry or upset, like, they really don't bother her, because the mask changed her. And that is the beauty, and the reason why I think it works so strongly. And it does, what Rachel's saying, what Nucha's saying, I had my experiences with it. I think it works so strongly because on our insides, we really are very, very, very beautiful. Uncomplaining, hardworking, joyous, serene, whatever other positive attribute you want to throw in. We are. We're a piece of God. We're God's essence and being, God's most inner dimension. So is there any imperfection there? None.
Yes.
None at all, none.
Not always you feel like that sometimes.
Right. But when you're wearing that mask is really evoking what you really are. In other words, you're not wearing a mask that's not you. You're actually wearing a mask that is you. You just don't know that part of you. So if that mask is serene and genteel and refined, and you're edgy and nervous, and inside that edgy, nervous you, there's that very serene, beautiful, regal piece. It's called your soul. So when you wear that mask, the reason I believe why it works so powerfully and the change occurs is because it's evoking what's really you to come out. If you're, like Menucha was saying, joy, energy, vivacious, that's all inside of you. So when you're wearing that mask, that you that's buried under the exhaustion or annoyance or feeling small or whatever it is, that's just the surface. The real you comes out, and that is what the real you is. And that's why, again, I think it works so strongly, just like in a different way, but a similar concept. Lubavitch Rebbe speaks about the idea of what we call mivtsayim, which means when someone comes up to a Jew or non-Jew for that matter on the street or something like that and says, oh, excuse me, would you Jewish? Would you like to light Shabbos candles? Or a non-Jew tell you about the Noahide laws? The question is, why in the world does this work? Here you are, this could be like a 14-year-old or younger kid speaking to an adult, and the adult's listening to the child about Shabbos or mezuzah or tefillin. Like, why does this work? And the Rebbe said the reason it works is not because the child is so overwhelmingly, powerful and knowledgeable, and it's because whatever the child is saying is resonating deep inside yourself. And your soul inside is saying, yes, yes, yes. And you feel that resonating piece, and that's why you say yes, and that's why you take the candles, and that's why you agree to put on the tefillin, and that's why you express interest in kosher or mezuzah. because you feel the yes inside yourself. So I'm saying similarly, when you're acting calm or centered or regal or refined or joyous or energized or calm or compassionate or patient, or inside yourself, there's a piece that resonates, because inside of yourself, there is that, all of those beautiful qualities buried in your own soul energy. And that's, I think, why it works so well. So Rachel was sharing the experiences she's had, and she says, this works. My commercial. And Menucha put it to practice this week and saw it was good. Anyone else? Anyone else? So I should say for myself, so in the past, I've done this very strongly. I've really seen like such incredible change. I did this with the quality of patience, because I was so incredibly impatient, which is not so good being a teacher or a mother. I did this with just loving other people. I saw really incredible change. So this week I tried to do it with a few things. Well, one thing, it was a little hard for me to always, I had the ideas of how I was going to behave, like the actions I wanted to do. I didn't always remember, and I didn't always have the opportunity, but I did peripherally have the idea in my head. So I did feel that on some level, I was like trying to live this idea. And each time I did remember and have the opportunity, so I had to remember to behave that way, and I had to have the opportunity. But in both of those, when both of those converged, it did feel very powerful. Like, oh, I'm acting the part. I can't wait for the interchange to happen. That was sort of like what I was thinking, like, this is so cool. I'm acting this and it's going to happen, and I can't wait. And this is so exciting that I can do actions, and through these actions, change my inner world. Which, as I said, it's so, to me, it's the most exciting thing to do, to change yourself. It's the most liberating thing. It's the most exciting thing, that we are the putty. We are the fabric that's changing. And that's really, really, really exciting. Especially if you've been stuck in a certain way for like 50 some years. I'm like, stuck? You can always change. That's like an exciting headspace. You can always change. So anyone else would like to share their experiences this week, or like Rachel did previously in these works? Okay, well, if not, either we can charitably assume you all worked but just don't want to share.
Probably.
It's not always easy to share, but keep up the work. Especially if you're trying to change something that's a real deep-rooted issue. You might I don't have such a success story, and I did the actions. I didn't see any interchange. I have nothing to say that we sound so positive. Keep it up. Change really
It's not always easy.
happens. It's not easy. It's not easy to keep up the actions. As I said for myself, I had to remember, and I had to have those opportunities. And they both had to happen. I had to remember, and it had to be the opportunity. So it's not always easy, but you're worth it. That's, I think, the line I want to remember and think about. I'm worth it. I'm worth working on. I'm worth the time. I'm worth the effort. You know, as Jewish women, I think we're so used to thinking everyone else is worth it. And doing so much for our children or our grandchildren or our parents. And, you know, that's just sort of our nature, that everyone else is worth it. And as such, we expend tremendous efforts to help, you know, all these other people in our worlds. And it's nice to pause and breathe and think, I'm worth it. And since I'm worth it, I'm worth working on. I'm worth it. I'm worth putting effort into. I'm worth believing in. I'm worth affirming as a valuable person and as a person capable of changing and as a person of self-worth, as a person of infinite value, as a person who's a piece of God's essence and being. I'm worth it. So I think the more we really talk to ourselves, convince ourselves of the truth that I'm worth it, the more will work. It's just like for someone else, you'd make this whole nice meal, and for yourself, you'll just grab something from the fridge. If you can take the effort to make for someone else, why don't you make for yourself? I can't be bothered. Well, for someone else, you could be bothered. So I'm worth it. I'm worth working on. I'm worth believing in. I'm worth putting effort into. Just because I've been in an unhappy situation for 50, 60 years, doesn't mean I'm stuck. I still got plenty of years ahead of me. Wouldn't it be nice to be liberated? Just because I've had this problem for X number of years, it'd be nice not to. Just because I've had this limitation or insecurity, it'd be nice not to. I'm worth it. I'm worth it. Anyone else want to share from their work or non-work over the past week?
Can I ask you a question? Let me turn it back on. I just wanted to ask you a question. This class and previous class, you were saying that at redemption, we almost fell beyond 49 level of impurity.
By the Exodus.
By the Exodus. Could you, and then you said we almost lost opportunity to be redeemed, right? Could you draw a little parallel to our current time?
That's an excellent question, Rivka. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe actually speaks about that. And we actually see this. We see this in the facts. We see this in the Haggadah. So when the Jews left Egypt 3,300 some years ago, as we said, this class and in previous classes, we were on the 49th level of impurity. I'm not saying each one of us, we were all reincarnations, so I don't want to malign anyone here. But as a group, as a nation, 3 million Jews left. We were quite low. And as we were told that if God even held us one more day in Egypt, we would have fallen just a little bit lower and we wouldn't have gotten out. And we actually say this in the Haggadah. When we're talking, one of the famous portions of the Haggadah, what we read by the Seder on Passover, is we speak to the 4 sons, right? There's a wise son, a wicked son, a simple son, and a son that doesn't even know how to ask. Those are the 4 sons by the Seder. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe says there's a 5th son, actually. There's a son that he doesn't even show up. Son that doesn't bother going to a Seder. So those are the sons of the Seder. So we're speaking to the wicked son. We say to him, if you had been there, you wouldn't have been redeemed. Like, he's a wicked son. He's a non-believer. And we say, you wouldn't have been redeemed. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe comments on that we're saying, if you had been there, you wouldn't have been redeemed. But by the coming redemption, you will be redeemed. Because every single Jew will be redeemed. That did not happen in Egypt. In Egypt, the sages discuss what percentage of Jews left Egypt. Rashi, the classical commentator, says 1 in 5 Jews got out, meaning 20%. Approximately 3 million Jews left Egypt, which would mean some 15 million did not. Very literal figures of 1 in 5 got out. Other sages say only 1 in 50 got out. Other sages say only 1 in 500 got out. That for every Jew that got out, 499 Jews didn't get out. And the Jews that got out, we're saying, were on such a low level. So what were the rest of the Jews like? Obviously they weren't better, but were they worse? We're saying the basic quality between the Jews that got out, 1 out of every 5, I mean, 1 got out and 4 did not, or 1 out of every 50, 1 got out and 49 did not, or 1 out of 500, 1 got out and 499 did not. The difference was the basic belief in redemption. The Jews that believed in God and believed in redemption, even though they maybe weren't particularly pious, they were probably idolaters, but they still believed in God and believed in redemption. And that got them out. And the other 80% or far greater percentages did not get out. It's actually, our sages say that in the plague of darkness, the second to last plague, one of the reasons for the plague of darkness was that all the Jews who didn't get out died and were buried then. So the Egyptians, there was a week when the Egyptians couldn't see a thing, couldn't move, had no clue what was going on outside their own, literally their own selves. And that's when all those Jews died and were buried, because we didn't want the Egyptians to rejoice and to say, okay, we're dying, they're dying, we're all dying. No, we didn't want the Egyptians to find out, but that is what happened. But we're told, in the current redemption, in the ultimate redemption, every single Jew will get out. There will not be the concept of only the righteous ones, or for that matter, only the believing ones. Every single Jew will get out. And on a global cosmic level, we believe enough. We've done enough for every single Jew to get out. You could say, well, I don't know about me. So we all have personal work to do. And when Mashiach comes, we'll do our personal mop-up jobs. We'll do our personal work. But that doesn't remove the cosmic global merit that every single one of us will get out. There's actually, going back to this midrash, where it discusses what percentage of Jews got out, and one sage says 1 in every 5, and one sage says 1 in every 50, and one says 1 in every 500. And the Bible says, wow, what a depressing midrash. Like, why are we being told such a depressing fact? And he answers, because in a sense, history repeats itself. But we need to understand that in the positive, that right now we could look around and we could say, I don't know if anyone believes the way I do. Maybe for many of you, you might be the only person in your family or in your community or in your neighborhood, among your network of friends, that really has this connection to God. And it could feel sort of like, well, I'm such a tiny minority. I mean, all the people I know, or most of my friends, or most of the people I grew up with, or most of my family, they're not like this. So we should remember that medrash. But the Torah says it works in reverse. First, it'd be like, you could feel like, for every one person that believes, there's 500 people that don't. But stick believing, keep believing. And then from 1 in 500, the numbers will reverse and it'll get a little better. The odds will get better. And they'll be like, oh, actually, there's more believers than I realized. There's more people that have a connection. I thought I was the only one in the whole world, or almost the only one in my world that has a connection to God. But now I see there's more people that have a connection than I realized. And actually, the numbers are shrinking. It's not like 500 people versus 1. It's like maybe 1 in 50. It's still not great odds, but it's a lot better. And they're saying, keep working, keep believing. And then you'll see the world change more. And instead of 1 in 50, like there's for every person that's believing, there's about 50 people that don't, it'll shrink even more. It'll be 1 in 5. There's a lot of people believe. I mean, it's still a lot more that don't, but there's a lot of people that believe. And keep working, and it'll come to the point where you'll see every single Jew's going to believe. Because truly, again, as you scratch the surface, just as I was saying before, why does it work so well, this masked man theory? Because underneath our multitude, myriads of masks, is us as a piece of God, in which we possess all of these beautiful traits. So similarly, underneath people that don't believe and don't think they believe and say they don't believe, underneath those masks, Jews believe. And when we keep believing and keep spreading a belief and keep talking about our belief, it helps the people around us shed their not as pretty masks and come in touch with belief as well. So in this redemption, every single Jew is going to get out. Anyone else? Any other thoughts on the work of this past week? Okay. Well, hopefully this Menucha's voice and Rachel's voice made you say, hey, me too. And you're going to work on it. And you're going to see, wow, it really works. All right. So let us go to what we were doing before this. We had started learning Psalm 121. It was a while ago because we had like a lot of different things that kept coming up. So I'm going to we had started the Psalm. It's a very short Psalm. Tehilim. We had done the first 2 verses. I'm going to quickly review them and do a little bit of the Psalm, and then we'll do some Shabbos. So the Psalm begins a song of ascent. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. From when will my help come? My help comes from God, maker of heaven and earth. He will not allow your foot to falter. Your guardian, God, will not slumber. Behold, the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. God is your guardian. God is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. God will protect you from every evil. He will guard your soul. God will guard your departure and your arrival from this time and forever. It's a beautiful psalm. And we did the first 2 verses when we did this, which was quite a while ago. Just even in a very simple way, lifting up my eyes to the mountains. When will my delivery come? Where will bring my salvation? Because we said we look at the world around us and we sort of think, oh, this is going to help me. Oh, this is going to help me. Oh, this is going to help me. And then it doesn't seem to be helping. We're like, wait, where's all my protectors? Where are they? Where'd they all go to? And then you're like, oh, my help comes from God. I can't rely on any of these things. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Sometimes God uses them as tools, but sometimes it's obvious that they're just tools and they're not there for me. And what I need to do is trust and turn to God. And obviously sometimes we're in a position where nothing human can help me. Like I have no choice but to turn to God because I don't see any normal human way to be saved out of this crazy situation. And somehow we all seem to have those situations in our life where nobody can help me except God. But it's not only in those very difficult challenges where no human can help me, all right, I'm turning to God. It's in all the details every single day. The big details, the little details. God is there for us. Sometimes God shows us, you thought that was natural? Ha! That wasn't natural at all. That was me. I knew it was him, but then he showed me and I really knew it was him. And all the details of our life, he's always there for us. And when we turn to him sincerely, we'll see it. You should all merit to see it. Again, I can think of many big things in my life. I can think of small things. I told you last week that this week was my daughter's bat mitzvah. It was very beautiful. I took her to New York. We went together, mother-daughter solo trip, so to speak. We went Tuesday night. We came back early yesterday morning. And being me, I had I could just see all the holes in the trip, so to speak, and all the details that needed to work out and would they work out and whatever. It was just unbelievable how literally every step of the way I just saw. I think a lot of times when you're not in your normal routine, it's easier to see, I guess because you feel more vulnerable and you more feel the need for God's help in all these little details, and just seeing every step of the way, God's help, God's help, God's help. There's a concept when we travel, as we're traveling, we say a special prayer for travelers to bring God's help. And some people have the custom, as we do in Chabad, that every day when you're away, you say that prayer without God's name at the end. Because again, when you're out of your own home environment, there's more vulnerability and more need for that extra protection. But it's so beautiful when you see it, and you just see it and realize how God is taking such good care of you. So that was verse 1 and 2. We're up to verse 3. He will not allow your foot to falter. Your guardian will not slumber. So basically, what we're saying here very simply is we're using this metaphor of sleeping because we can imagine if I had a bodyguard, if I had a soldier, if I had someone around designed to protect me, still, that protection is not infallible. The bodyguard could fall asleep on the job. Anything could happen, but not God. God's protection never slips. God never spaces out on us. God never gets distracted. If God's protection is surrounding me, God's protection is always, always, always there for me. And the reason why we really have to emphasize this point is because Psalms were written by King David when the Jews were in Israel, but King David knew with prophetic spirit that there was going to be a very, very difficult exile we were going to go through. And in that difficult exile, very often, it would feel that at the best, God is sleeping on the job, so to speak, or a lot worse. God isn't interested in us. God's not paying attention to us. God's not there for us. Our people as a nation, it's unbelievable we exist today. It's unbelievable we survived. We've gone through such harshness over 100+ years of exile. And therefore, King David is saying this now, like, before we come to the situation, to know whatever it looks like, whatever it seems to you, God is not sleeping on the job. God is not disinterested. God is not distracted. God is there. God is protecting. God is taking care. Sometimes, again, you just feel it and you're just basking in the glow. And if you don't feel it, you should know it's still true. And again, the fact that Jews are alive today, 15 million of us, and I'm sure many, many more, is the greatest testimony to God's eternal protection of the Jewish people. Verse 4, behold, the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. So we're saying this idea of God, again, always being there. The Malbim, one of the commentators, say slumbering is a different level than sleeping. Some could be a light sleep, a very deep sleep. So whatever the version of sleep is, God's not doing it. God's not deeply sleeping on the job. God's not even lightly sleeping on the job. God is completely there for us. Now, a question could be asked, what do you mean? Why are we saying this? The guardian of Israel doesn't sleep, doesn't slumber. God's watching us. God's watching us. God's watching us. God watches all of mankind. That's what it says in Job. God watches every human. That's true. But what the psalm is saying here is God is focused on you. God is focused on the Jewish people. And from, so to speak, the focus on the Jews, the whole world is sustained. The whole world is nurtured. The whole world is protected. But God's relationship to the Jew is not like his relationship to the rest of the world. God's protection of the Jew is not like his protection of the rest of the world. And there are many wonderful people in this world that are not Jewish. And, I give a class to Noahites, to not Jewish women, wonderful people, very God-oriented people, very spiritual, very dedicated. And you could say, well, maybe I'm not as good as them. And the answer is, you could be right. Maybe you're not. But it doesn't make a difference. God's relationship to the Jew is different than to the rest of the world. Every Jew is his only child. Your relationship to your child is different than to the other people in your life, even if the other people in your life might be nicer to you than your children. They might be better people than your children. They might be kinder than your children. But your child is your child. So God's relationship to every single Jew is, this is my child. And for my focus on my child, I'm helping everyone in the world as well. Verse 5. God is your guardian. God is your shade at your right hand. So God is our guardian, our shade. He will protect us. He will safeguard us from anything, human or otherwise, that's disturbing us. Now, the idea, it actually says God is our shade, that just as the shadow, so to speak, mimics the man. We have God, as we behave, God responds and behaves accordingly. Of course, as we're told in many different times, like we're told that we should be compassionate to elicit God's limitless compassions. It's interesting, we have a lot of laws that is demanding from us an almost irrational level, for example, of compassion. Like if someone has animals, we're told that you have to feed your animals before yourself. The person can say, wait a minute, I'm hungry. I know the animal's hungry, but I'm also hungry. The animal's not going to get sick if it has to wait a half an hour to be fed. The animal's not going to run away if it has to wait a half an hour to be fed. Let me eat, and then I'll feed the animal. I'm also hungry. I'm the man. No, you have to have compassion. We're told even your slaves, even your non-Jewish slaves, of course nowadays we're not slaves, but in the times of the temple, a Jew could own Jewish slaves. And there were many, many laws on how well the Jewish slaves had to be treated, to such a degree that the sages said if you bought a slave, you're like buying a master for yourself. Or the Jew could own non-Jewish slaves. But even for those non-Jewish slaves, there were so many laws on how nicely you had to treat these non-Jewish slaves. To the degree, again, if you're hungry and the slave is hungry, you got to make sure the slave eats first. And the slave gets to eat from the same foods you eat. Like, what? He's my slave. Why is he eating first? Because you have to be compassionate. And your limitless compassion on others evokes God's limitless compassion on you. So God's our shadow, and as we walk in his road, that same energy comes to us. Looking at the time and thinking if I think I will just quickly finish this, and then I do a little bit of Shabbos. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The sun and the moon have many different practical and also allegorical concepts. Like the sun and the moon could imply an exile. Sometimes we have problems from the sun and sometimes from the moon. So the sun, the shining, beautiful sun, could be like the successes when things are going well and you're really accomplishing. And then you could have those problems like of ego, pride, arrogance, self-centeredness. Or you could have the moon. The moon is when it's night, when it's dark. And of course, there's a lot of problems from the darkness and suffering and afflictions of exile. God's close to you. God's with you. You're serving him. He's showering you with his protection. You're not going to have the sun issues. You're not going to have the moon issues. You'll always feel in whatever situation, in the problems from the good or the problems from the darkness, God's with you. They're not going to be problems. Verse 7, God will protect you from every evil. He will guard your soul, which means both in this world and in the world to come. No human will harm you. No animal will attack you. The evil inclination will not have power over you. God is guarding you. And the final verse, God will guard your departure and your arrival from this time and forever. Your departure, again, these things can be understood on many, many, many levels. Like your departure, you start off studying God's Torah, you leave and go into the world. God's guarding it. Till you come back. Your departure, your return, within the houses of God, the synagogue, the study hall, then out into the world, then back to those houses of God. Every step of the way, wherever your feet are taking you, God is watching and protecting you. Or it could be the departure and arrival from Israel to exile, from exile back to Israel. God is watching us this time and forever. God is there for us. So it's a very beautiful psalm that really should make us feel the truth, how close we are, how loved we are, and how protected we are by God. In terms of the laws of Shabbos, the next category of forbidden things on Shabbos is not so common in terms of its application. It's called in the Hebrew zoreh, which is generally translated as winnowing. But what it means is some movement of the wind that's causing a separation of items of like, so you would think, in ancient times, they would throw the grains up. So the husk, the chaff, will get separated from the kernel of wheat. So the good stuff was the kernels of wheat. The bad stuff was the husks, the inedible, calling it the chaff. And the wind, as they threw this into the wind, it separated, and then you got the good and discarded what you didn't want. So it sort of sounds like a selection. Of course, as we know, and as we've spoken many times, one of the most difficult areas of keeping the Sabbath is the laws of separating. But this is not a regular law of separating, because it's very exclusively forbidding separating by wind. The separation was accomplished by the wind. So therefore, any of the practical applications all have to have the element of wind in them. So for example, based on these laws, if you had, let's say you had like a bag of nuts or peanuts or other types of nuts, and sometimes we have is the nuts and the shells are all mixed together. So what some people do, they don't want to start picking with their hands and this and that, they blow. And as they blow, they're separating the nuts from the shells. They're not shelling them by the blowing. But like in the bag, you had nuts and you had shells, and you go, and it separates. Forbidden on Shabbos. You're separating by wind. You're creating the wind, but that's called separating by wind. You cannot spit in the wind on Shabbos, meaning you're going outside and there's any wind in the air, you cannot spit, because that would consider that the spit would get separated by the wind. You can't, again, if there's a wind outside, you can't like just throw up papers in the air. I don't know why you would do that, but you're so tired of this work, you throw it up in the air, because the wind is going to separate those papers. Forbidden on Shabbos. You cannot, this is probably the most practical thing you could think of, you cannot take a tablecloth and shake it outside on Shabbos, right? Sometimes you have crumbs on your tablecloth, and you don't want to be bothered cleaning all the crumbs off, or maybe getting on the floor. So you go outside and you shake off the crumbs. And, it's in your backyard. There's an Arab. It's no problem carrying the tablecloth. You were eating outside. It was a picnic. You're not allowed to shake the tablecloth outside on Shabbos, because then that movement is creating a wind, which is separating the crumbs from the tablecloth. And that is forbidden on Shabbos. What you are allowed to do, that sometimes people think you're not for this reason, is you are allowed to use an aerosol spray on Shabbos. Some people think, well, if you spray, it's forbidden because the spray is being spread by the wind. So that's forbidden, but actually it's not, because it's really the pressure of the aerosol that's causing that mist to shoot out, not the wind. And therefore that is permissible on Shabbos. Any questions about this or any other laws of Shabbos?
Yes, I have a question. I want to know from where it's coming from. Maybe the same idea as you said, separation. Like we're preparing before Shabbos paper towels. I take them off, right? So I forgot to take off not enough. I don't have enough those sheets. So what I do, I go in between, just not to go on the line where it's supposed to be. So my question is where it's coming from. Why? Many things I don't pay attention. It doesn't bother me. I just do because I have to do. But somebody asked me and I had no clue what to answer.
So there's a concept on Shabbos that you can't cut in a certain shape. So when you have the perforated lines, like a roll of toilet paper or paper towels or something along those lines, and you're cutting on the perforations, that's creating a certain size. It's a certain measure. So that we're not allowed to do something that's in a certain measure, certain quantity. And that's why we can't do that on Shabbos.
It's a similar, like if we cut, it goes along with like we should not have anything in same size. Like if we're cutting vegetables, we have to kind of like cut them quickly, not having them exactly small size.
The vegetables is different. The vegetable is really a subsidiary of grinding. And that's why we're told when you're cutting vegetables on Shabbos, make them a little larger. Don't make them in these nice, small, perfect, even sizes that you make during the week. Make them a little bigger, which I guess could lead to the idea of they don't have to all be different sizes. They just have to be bigger than the size you make during the week, which means they're probably not going to look as perfect and even. But that's different. That's considered a subsidiary of grinding. This is like the same idea that people before Shabbos cut toilet paper into pieces, because on Shabbos you're not supposed to rip a piece of toilet paper from the roll because you're probably going to rip it on perforated lines, or even if you say, no, my roll doesn't have any perforations, still, if you're looking, you're probably going to rip it to a certain size, the size you want. But we're not supposed to do that on Shabbos. So we're told, like, if a person was stuck, not supposed to have the situation, but if they didn't have pre-cut toilet paper, what they could do, if it was Shabbos, is like turn away so they're literally not seeing the size they're cutting, and then just rip off a piece. So that you're not ripping it to any specific size because you're not even looking at the size.
Right. Okay, understand. And amazing. I know that behind every law there is some passage in the Torah. So if I want to find answer to certain question, why? Like why this law was introduced? Would I always find answer? Maybe not myself coming to you or to Rabbi, but would it be always answering Torah for every law? Like we have number or everything that we talk about, even from the separation of wind and things, like you said, would we always find answer in Torah or in Gemara, in any book?
So you should find it somewhere. It wouldn't necessarily be in Torah, meaning like in Torah, the laws are often very cryptic. But based on the Torah, we know that there are things that are prohibited on the Sabbath. And then comes the Talmud, the Gemara, which is going to explain what's prohibited and what's not. And there'll be a lot of discussion on it. And yes, there'll definitely be verses quoted as support texts. But if you looked in those verses, you wouldn't necessarily see the correlation. You need to know what the sages are saying to understand. And then there's also the concept of that this is the tradition, meaning that this verse means this and doesn't mean that. You could say, why? I think it means this. Well, it's not that the sages were per se coming up with what they thought. They were really conveying a tradition that was conveyed and conveyed and conveyed all the way back to God to Moses on Mount Sinai. Meaning besides the written Torah that God gave Moses, he also taught him the whole, what we call the oral Torah. It says that with the passing of Moses, when Moses passed away, the Jews forgot, I don't remember how many laws, I think maybe 1,700. I don't remember, something like that, a tremendous number. And it's like, wow, they forgot. Again, it was something like 1,700, but don't hold me to it. If they forgot so many, how much more did he teach them for them to forget all that amount? So, and these were all things that were not written in the Torah. He had to teach them based on the Torah, meaning what God taught him. So all the way going back to Moses teaching the Jews, there was already the concept of things that are from the verses, but are only known because of the oral tradition that began with Moses being taught by God and then passing it on to the Jewish people.
Okay, thank you very much.
But if you had something specific that, I want to know why we this, that, or the other, or what's the source of it, you could definitely look into it. You could ask me, you could ask your rabbi. I might come up with an answer, I might not. But everything has to come back to some source. There has to be some source for everything.
Okay. All right.
Anyone else?
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining. Thank you for all the participation.
Thank
Thank you
you
for all
very
those
much.
that are committed and inspired by Rachel and Menucha, and they're going to go for it themselves. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you. Thank you.